All right, welcome everybody to the Konflux community call on September 9th, 2025. As a reminder, this is a public community call. So please keep that in mind when we're discussing topics. Also, while participating, you're agreeing to abide by the code of conduct that we have published. The first topic, well, let me share the agenda really quick. And then I will actually just state what I was going to state. The first topic on the agenda is the ADR review. So we have a couple of ADRs. The final review we have for the caching ADR on the issue itself. Let me change to this. Right. You can see here the milestone is the 10th. So that means that when the Konflux Governance Committee meets again on the 10th, I think that we will make a determination whether to extend the feedback period or to decision whether this is accepted or not. So that's one ADR. And the other one is where there's a comment period, which is open for the GitUps as a primary configuration interface. Similarly, that has a milestone set for next week. So please review those ADRs, provide your comments, feedback. It's all appreciated. Yes, Ralph.
I want to opine for a second about that last one, that Brian is the submitter and there's a lot of open threads. We've got an expectation in the process that the submitter will respond to comments and questions and resolve things in the doc. But Brian is on leave this week. He's away from his keyboard. So I think the likelihood that we would get all those resolved by next week is maybe slim. Maybe we'll have a chance to see it, but my just bet on that one is that it'll be extended at least another week.
Thanks for that, Brian, or Ralph. Any other questions about those ADRs? All right, Mikola, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. So I would like to discuss sort of old topic that was raised some time ago, but just stopped without any decisions. So I don't aim to change anything dramatically right now. I'm just seeking further opinions and to just see what others are thinking about this problem. So currently we have kinds of build pipelines based on PVC and based on trusted artifacts. So we have a PVC-based pipeline as a historical, so we started from it, but at some point we switched to trusted artifacts by default, and like majority of the currently onboarding and already onboarded users using this trusted artifacts version of the pipeline. But we still maintain two of them, which is additional burden sort of to the team. And so I would like to sort of analyze and hear opinions what we should do next, whether we should move towards deprecation of PVC pipeline and do some steps, or we just leave it as is, assuming that we will support both of them for like a long period of time. So both of the approaches have pros and cons. For trusted artifacts pipeline, so it has advantages that it could have customizations in the pipeline, which is not allowed to PVC one. And also it allows to spread the pods across nodes, so they are not having some affinity to specific PVC on specific node. So the pipeline could be splitted between the nodes, so it's a performance boost in the end. And yes, that's the default. From cons, so first of all, it requires more resources because of trusted artifacts operation, especially for pulling and pushing. Surprisingly, it takes around 3 gigs of RAM just to obtain artifact, which is quite expensive in the end because we have a lot of tasks that consume artifacts, and that could be fixed, but I'm not sure how complex the fix would be. At least it's not trivial in my understanding. And second potential problem, if we move just to OCI variant, is that we would need to do the migration, which shouldn't be too hard because PVC pipeline is not much customizable, so users couldn't add some tasks, so it should be relatively easy to do. But why we still keeping it, might want to keep it, that some teams might use this flow if they have a large pieces of data to be transferred between tasks. So PVC in this case could be an optimal solution. So we're going to do push and pulls, and we are not like pressing on RAM because of these huge artifacts. So PVC still could be of use. So I would like to hear opinions on the future of this, where we should go, in your opinion.
I mean, I think that we've talked about it a little bit, Nicola. I think that it definitely makes sense for us to continue using trust artifacts. It is much more beneficial when we're trying to balance that usability and security because it allows for customizations of the tasks and allows us to isolate trust to the specific tasks that are used instead of having to establish trust on all tasks in the pipeline. You mentioned that there's some memory issues there. I mean, there's also data transfer costs as well. There are some, I mean, it would be great if we can improve some of those, but it would all require additional work. I think I saw Louis join the call. I know Louis and I have been talking about using manifest references instead of blob references for the trust artifacts. I wonder if using that would allow us to create more efficient memory utilization in those trust artifact step actions, if that's one of the primary concerns. And there's some investigation that, or what we brought up on the call before about reusing artifacts. If we can reuse these trust artifacts, that could also cut down on cost. But I mean, it's going to be beneficial if you're trying to do anything with like models that are many gigabytes. PVCs are just going to be more efficient. So I'm not sure that we're at the place where we can say that only one of them is going to be supported. I think that there's definitely use cases for each of them. I know it is a increased support burden, but we do have some tooling to help reduce that support burden by auto-generating trust artifact tasks if needed. And we do have some tasks that only support trust artifacts as well. That's certainly something we can consider going forward. We don't always have to generate tasks that support PVCs. We can make the determination that this is only a task that we want to support for a trust artifact. And then you don't have that support burden.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, just a couple of comments on the trust artifacts. in general. I think the idea was to always move this towards something that's part of Tecton itself. But I think we kind of put that in the back burner and then knocked it off the stove. So I think we might want to put some effort into making, the idea, the pattern of trust artifacts, something that's core to Tecton, which might bring us some benefits. So it's not this like very Konflux specific concept. The other thing is we should probably look into, I don't know if it has been done already, but why is it so expensive to use a trust artifact? Are we doing things without streams that we should not be doing? That probably requires some effort to try to understand why that's taking up so many resources.
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder about the trust artifacts going to Tecton. We haven't considered that. My assumption is that for the second point, my assumption is that when we're doing the blob fetch, it's all going into memory first, before being stored on the file system. Mikola, do you think, would you be able to create a feature for planning trust artifacts to be proposed to Tecton core instead of it being something that's only ours? If there's some breaking changes that we want to make eventually, it might be better for us to live with the trust artifacts that we have today and plan that migration to only have to do that breaking change once, learn what we did from our implementation and try and fix it if we can get it added to Tecton.
Well, it's a good question whether we would like to do it or not. So I believe we should think on it more. But yeah, well, let's do it. Probably it's more a concern for the build team, so we can think more on this. And if we decide that it makes sense, that we will create feature.
All right, thanks, Mikola.
Okay, thank you.
And as Ralph mentioned in the chat, he was wondering if we get any benefit from using Z standard chunked for compression. That's something we can certainly look into as well. So, all right, any other comments? All right, Adam.
Sure. So my topic is on now a really shared concern across the builds for RPMs, and as well as any kind of like future ideas and notions of supporting Java as a sort of primary supported ecosystem on Konflux. One of the things that we've discovered is that both of these kind of break at least the initial operating assumption of Konflux, which is for each component that you build, you'll have one artifact that you then feed into the snapshot, and that's the reference that you carry forward. For both RPMs and Maven builds, doesn't make sense to have one component be strictly matched to one artifact that comes out. In the case of RPMs, you can have one source RPM produce multiple RPM packages. The order is usually around 10 or fewer. You get another order of magnitude if you're going into the Maven ecosystem or Java ecosystem. Some of the middleware portfolio products that we have in PNC, when they do a build, and you can think of it as like a component that is built, they can produce as much as 600 quote unquote artifacts. Some of them aren't all binaries. Maven throws in a bunch of extra metadata along with it. And so one of the things that I think we're doing with RPMs is we're basically, their process is they are uploading those built RPM packages to Pulp. They're getting, because we're using Pulp with an OCI backend, they're getting a digest for each artifact that they upload. And they're then just putting that in a JSON, pushing that as an artifact to Quay. And that is the effective component URL that and digest that is put into Konflux and shows up as like the artifact. So we no longer have just like an actual thing with with the actual kind of like executable in it. We now just basically have some metadata that is referenced to other things. So it's kind of an informal thing right now on the RPM side. And I think we were talking about potentially formalizing this, likely would need to be an AVR to have Konflux or potentially anything understand that this thing actually is just a pointer to a whole bunch of other OCR artifacts.
Is this so? I know Ryan, you joined in the middle of Adam talking. This feels related to a topic that has been discussed in the past around a pipeline run can essentially produce any number of artifacts, and a pipeline run can essentially, or it could be possible for a pipeline run to generate its own snapshot to say that what is actually the thing that you're producing. It also, so I don't know how related that is, but I know that there's also been some requested feature in the backlog that might have actually been closed about being able to support producing multiple artifacts from a single pipeline run, which like all this also goes into the component application rework that I think we're starting to plan. Do you know how that might relate to how those different concepts might relate to each other?
Yeah. So in terms of like a new kind of component model, something that I've certainly seen with the Maven ecosystem is it's really common to have one repository producing multiple artifacts, and to, I guess, ask each one to be kind of built independently of each other doesn't work. It's a negative developer experience. I've also seen cases, and I'm working with one group in particular, where they have a mono repo, they've got multiple libraries that are kind of form effectively like a core set of dependencies, but then they have individual services that are the sort of leaves in the tree, and they're standalone. And they one of the challenges that they have is they're often developing changes to the core libraries and changes to particular services in parallel with each other. In a monorepo, you can just do that in one pull request. But then to build them kind of intelligently gets very hard, because you'd want effectively the build of your core thing to then feed into any kind of dependent service and then try and kind of test them together. And If they're spread in different repositories, it's a little easier for us to do this on Konflux today, but I think I'm getting into a separate set of concerns around, the new model and monorepo versus multi-repo support.
Ryan, did you have a follow-up? We can't hear you if you're talking.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and say that one of the things that becomes difficult with building every artifact in an application, or not an application, in a repository separately, is that group testing is difficult for the integration service. It's one of the reasons why we only support group testing for pull requests and not for push jobs. If we were able to produce multiple child artifacts in a given build pipeline, that would make group testing a lot simpler for users. Obviously, it wouldn't solve the multi-repo problem, but it would go a long way for monorepos.
Ralph?
It's direct to Ryan's point. Louis asked the question, how widely used is it? Ryan, can you answer that first before I go?
Kruno might have a better idea. I know it's fairly common, at least, but I don't have any sort of numbers or anything like that.
I wanted to comment on just a detail about the RPM build pipeline. I put a link in sidebar to one of the tasks in the RPM build pipeline. Adam, when you were talking about it, you talked about them pushing to pulp, which then pulp is backended by Quay, and they have all these, you do a single RPM build and you get on the order of 10 RPM files that come out of it. The initial implementation had this import to Quay task. It still exists in the upstream and in the downstream pipelines right now, as far as I know, everywhere. But it creates an OCI artifact as the result of the build that has a particular artifact type. It's not called, in English, like an RPM. It's called an RPM build, which is meant to be this bigger collection of 10 or so RPM files, including the SRPM and others. And I guess I just want to point that out as a pattern that we could carry on more, right? If we wanted to do a build of a whole bunch of Java artifacts, we could push a custom OCI artifact of some type that's meant to represent the collection of those. It's not exactly an image index or like a list, but a set of the many that then can get recombined later, right? You can extract some of the blobs out of it and use them and not others, like you would do with an RPM in this case.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't call it an image index because that is very specific to multi-arch things. So it's got to be this that I saw that too, and it definitely was like the start of this kind of idea of like maybe this doesn't even necessarily have to be specific to RPM. There might be just a more general thing, a general structure that we can propose, and we could then specify like specifics for a particular packaging ecosystem.
Mikola?
Yes, thank you. Back to the topic of producing multiple artifacts from the same component, especially in monorepo case. So first of all, build pipeline is designed to build only one artifact because we have like everything targeted only one, like prefetch dependencies, build source container, and everything else. So every check expects only single thing to check and to do operation on. But instead, what we can do, especially with the new application component model, we can try to have single component in configuration in the user's namespace, and then start several pipelines in parallel on the change. So each of it would deliver artifact, and that artifact would be further processed. Does it make sense?
I'd say it doesn't make sense for it's even projects that might feel small, they might still have they were called multi-module. They're going to become multi-project with Maven 4 for reasons. It's pretty common to have a Java developer have these multiple smaller jars, but then when they're doing development, they're just kind of building them they build them all at once.
Okay, but
and you get into these it gets very challenging to then ask developers to untangle their dependency trees in order to onboard to Konflux.
I would like to understand better the purpose of releasing several jars within the same pipeline. So if we build an artifact from source, why do we need to have multiple jars? So are they like different versions of the same jar, or is it different arch, or are they completely different jars? So I don't really understand this part. Could you elaborate, please?
Yeah, so I'm gonna try and pull up like for like Maven. That's not a good one. Like I think if you look at like a bigger Java project, like to build Maven Core. Maven Core is actually consists of like several different libraries, and those are distributed as individual libraries that are reused by several different things within the ecosystem. One might be like the Maven itself, and it'll pull in different specific dependencies, or package itself with a specific set of library dependencies. Another component might package itself with another set of dependencies. So that core set, if you were going to like do it on Konflux, that might build itself and just build the Java artifacts, publish them to a Maven repository. And then there are downstreams to those that will be picking up the specific pieces of them.
And Mikola, like you were saying that today we produce one artifact in the pipeline. I think if we want to produce multiple artifacts, like I don't think that there is an assumption that you'd have the same pipeline as we have today. It would have to be some new pipeline that would know how to do this, and like relating to the conversations around like maybe this pipeline would generate its own snapshot, like that logic would have to be embedded in the pipeline. Maybe it wouldn't be supported by the people who support the current pipelines, but maybe there'd be some other team. Like right now, the people who are working on RPMs, they're building their own pipelines and they're kind of supporting this. And so it's not a matter of, do the pipelines we have today support the model we need, but can we construct the pipeline using the parts we have today in order to support that need? And if we can't, what are the gaps, and how can we fix those gaps?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. So technically, we can produce multiple artifacts from build pipeline. So if we abstract from what we have now, so it's really easy to produce them, push to target location, and just show the location in the results. The only limit is the results side as of now, but I believe we can find a workaround later for this. So technically for the build itself, it's not a problem. I'm more worried how we produce, like how we would check everything, build source containers, preferred dependencies, because, well, okay, you've got the idea. But yeah, I didn't mind. So,
but I mean, what your question was actually, I think that ties into well into why I raised my hand in response to what Ralph was saying. Like we have there's ways that you can create artifacts and associate them. You have the refers API. Adam was saying that the image index it's for multi-arch. That's not technically true. Image indices are just a way to wrap references to multiple different manifests in an immutable way. So I've seen a lot of times people will actually include provenance in there. People include SBOMs in there. The challenge is that nobody's going to know to find the information in that image index unless they have knowledge that it's there. But regardless, everything that's produced in the pipeline, we have to make sure that we can verify that content is what it should be. The refers API is powerful, but anybody that has access to the registry can attach additional things with the refers API. And so we really need to still ensure we generate provenance for every single artifact we produce, for every single reference in which we're planning on releasing. If we just have a single image index that everything is packaged inside, then you just have to know how to verify your trust in that one reference. If you have a single artifact, which you then toss a bunch of things together with the refers API, you have to be able to understand how to verify that object, how to find those related things, and how to verify your trust in all those related artifacts. So like there's benefits to both. The refers API also supports pagination. And so if you're generating hundreds of artifacts, we have created problems when we upload a single image manifest with multiple layers for our source images because the registry had a hard time actually doing the verification. And so doing something similar for an image index, it becomes a problem, or you have to be aware of limitations. So there's benefits, drawbacks to either, but regardless of the approach that we might want to take, we have to ensure that we're doing the appropriate things to, as Mikola was saying, make sure that we, for example, have source containers if that's required by the policy. And then when you're doing the verification on the artifacts, the check for source container presence might actually be different for container images versus these Maven artifacts. And what are those additional check modifications that need to be done? Louis?
Yeah, and just a quick terminology check. So when we look at what the OCI artifact spec is, that is a group of one or more files, blobs, right? So like if your build is producing 5 or 6 files, jar files or RPM files or whatever, you can take all of those and create a single OCI artifact that represents all those files. I feel like I'm guilty of this sometimes when I say OCI artifact, I really mean a single file, but that's not accurate. So the thing that is problematic is if you do have an OCI artifact that references multiple files that were built from your pipeline, we want to make sure that the digest of each one of those files ends up in the provenance, right? Because that's important for validation. And that's not something that chains can do today. And we need to enhance chains to be able to provide that information. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Louis, can I ask why that is? This is actually the question I'm on the stack for, is that if we have an OCI artifact that contains 10 blobs, and we have the digest of the OCI artifact manifest in the provenance, why is it important that we have the digest of all the individual files also in the manifest? Similarly, for an image index, if we have the digest of the image index in the provenance, currently we require that the digest of all of the image manifests that are like included in that are also in the provenance. Why? Should the image index be sufficient if that's the thing that's being ferried along to Conforma and being checked at future points?
So a lot of times when you're building OCI artifacts is because that's gonna those files, that content's gonna end up in something that's not an OCI registry. And at that point, the image manifest or the image index is gone, and all you have left is the actual files. So if you want from that end to verify its provenance, then the provenance to have its digest. But if you're always dealing with an OCI registry and you're always dealing with the same OCI image manifest and whatnot, that wouldn't be required.
Okay. Can I, and I'm sorry, Ryan, I'm abusing this text real quick, that in the image index and image manifest case, like normal containers, that within the system, we're always just moving along the image index. And so in practice, it doesn't matter that we happen to also have provenance for the individual manifests. But if you were to install one of these to a local cluster or somewhere where you've only pulled one image manifest, then if you still wanted to verify provenance in that location, you would need a reference to that.
Our provenance today includes the digest of the image index and each image manifest.
Yes. Yes, I know. I'm trying to justify why that's the case, because it takes extra work to make that happen.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. So the reason why the source of provenance includes those digests today, not just the image index, is because yes, if you may be dealing with just an image manifest, not the image index, and you don't want to disallow verification at that level.
Yeah. And in practice in the system, we're not dealing with image manifest. It's only at a hypothetical usage outside of Konflux where that would become real.
Right. Yeah. So for the OCI artifact case, if our release tasks are always dealing with the OCI image references and validating that, then yeah, we can verify that the provenance for the OCI artifact, and then we can push it to pulp or push it to a Python index or whatever. But then there's no posterity for validating those artifacts once they're out of the system, which is maybe it's okay, because a lot of the source of provenance that we have today is really only verifiable within the build system itself.
Thank you for that side quest. Ryan, I'm sorry I jumped you in stack. You're next for sure.
So this is a bit of a departure from the from what we were talking about with the conformal policies, but I'm kind of curious right now. Do we have products that are being built and tested and released in Konflux that are building things that are not containers or operators? We do. Okay.
Yeah.
Because one of my concerns here is if we're creating multiple artifacts from a build pipeline, how does the integration service know how to create a snapshot from that? I don't really know what the process is right now. If there's just a container image that's put into the snapshot and we treat it like it's a container image, and then something in the release pipeline knows how to extract whatever was actually built. But we might have to consider that when we, if we're creating multiple artifacts and putting those all into a snapshot, does the integration service have to be smarter about how it creates those snapshots? Do we have to give more control to users? I'd be curious about what people's thoughts are on that. Ralph, go ahead.
Yeah, just some examples are the RPM builds we were just talking about are currently being built in different instances of Konflux and are working their way successfully through integration service. Another example are there's some AI models that are put into OCI by the OCI copy task in build definitions. And then Tecton bundles as well are not technically container images, but work in much the same way, all three of those. And Louis right in the comment that the interface is the image reference. The build task exposes an image reference, just like an OCI string. And integration service never inspects it to see what it is. It just kind of passes it along through the system. And that means that normal containers are image manifests or image indexes, but they could also be these OCI artifacts of like a question mark type. And those
and we expect the team who's building and testing things to know what they're going to be pulling down and how to unpack it such that they can test it.
Right. The release service have to know how to handle these things. If it gets the wrong type to the wrong pipeline, that it explodes and says, I don't know how to release this kind of thing. You've passed to the wrong pipeline.
Okay. And kind of the second part of my concern here is with an image index. If you have, I know Maven isn't building in Konflux, but to use that as an example, let's say you built Maven in Konflux, Maven core, and you have all these jar files created. do we assume that Maven wants all of the jar files tested in a snapshot, or that they might want some subset or individual jar files tested? If it's the latter, then we probably have to look into giving users control over how their snapshots are built. And that should be a core piece of this. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, just really quick. I've said it before in places, but I'll try and say it again with like this context. Like we have build pipelines today which are quote unquote supported. We have release pipelines today which are quote unquote supported. There's parity between build and release. If we want to produce additional artifacts, users of Konflux can certainly do that on their own, but they can't expect to maintain the parity with the current release tasks that we have. So any new type of build time development that's needed, it's likely to be that a new release time task or set of tasks will be needed in order to maintain this parity between build and release. And so like as you're kind of alluding to, maybe we need to give people the ability to generate their own snapshots or their own relationship metadata in a way between these. Like I think that kind of goes hand in hand as we continue to venture outside of, we are building container images. But like container images were the first thing because they're the simplest. But now that we have this platform, which is extensible, which is rather easy to extend in terms of we can build new things. Well, now that we're building, we need to figure out how to release it. And if we're just releasing them as OCR artifacts, and then we shove the question about what this is to the person that's eventually consuming that OCR artifact, like then you don't have to like we already have that parity of we build an OCR artifact, we release an OCR artifact. But if we want to try and handle it any differently than this is an OCR artifact, it's a wrapper, we don't care what's in it, then we need to start the exploration of parity between this is build, this is a release, and when producing that release, or part of the verification that would have to happen in that release is, do we have all the expected metadata that we have, or do we have all the metadata that we expect to have from build time present at release time, and can we do that policy evaluation to make sure that all that metadata, all those artifacts pass the required policies?
Andrew, would this entail giving users more control over defining what is released from the snapshot and how it is released?
I mean, it's certainly a possibility that I mean, if for example, if you have a pipeline which creates builder images and then builds artifacts off of those, one example still within the OCI space is that you might want to a user might want to create two snapshots, and one of those snapshots they've released one place, another snapshot they released another place, but all those are essentially built from the same pipeline. So I think that there's similar situations that I've heard in the past for like debug containers. There are some containers that I have known in the past that teams actually want to build that have debug symbols enabled. And so if they're trying to debug an issue, they can actually take this same exact image and do a hot swap, or I don't know the technicals of how to do it, but you basically replace the image that's being used in a Kubernetes cluster with this one that has debug symbols enabled and actually lets you understand what the problems are. But you're not going to want to ship those debug containers to that same location. A long way to say, I think that we will find certain users or power users are definitely going to want to try and determine what artifacts they do release and which ones they don't release.
So my concern with that is that so hypothetically, if we give users the ability to control how their snapshots are constructed, They could start including things in their snapshots that were not built in Konflux. And that there may be a use case where you want that, right? You have some arbitrary image that's built by some other group, but you want to make sure whatever you're building is compatible with it. So you include that image in your snapshot in order to be able to do that. That's maybe not a huge security risk if it gets it only if that arbitrary image can only access the testing environments. But if we give users control over how they're building their snapshots or how they're composing their snapshots and how they're releasing things from those snapshots, then there's a risk that a user could pull in, an arbitrary image or something else from an untrusted environment and then release it. So how do we prevent that?
Conforma prevents that because Conforma does the checking based on the provenance that's there. If users create something from their own laptop, it might have provenance, but that provenance isn't going to be something that Conforma would trust because it's not provenance generated by the cluster. And like, if you are like in a lot of our use cases that we have internally, we really have one managed namespace where all the policies are defined and everything goes through that. But you can the release service or the release plan supports having managed pipelines as well as tenant pipelines. And if you have a snapshot that has these artifacts that I want to mirror them off to some other location, like you can certainly use the snapshot as a vector for doing that if you don't have that Conforma that required Conforma policy check in place. But anything that we as a team that is gating what can pass go, that can go to production, we require every artifact that we push to that's in that snapshot to pass Conforma.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Adam, I was gonna get back to your comment before about, having parity between build and release for really anything that we're building. And like I'm seeing that with our PMs, and for Java side, frankly, it would have to be, if it was Konflux first, we have to have something like that. And frankly, we actually are doing that already, where we are, in fact, for some Java content, we need to actually source it from a different system. And that system we've established the contract where OCI is the interface, where they're providing an OCI artifact that points to either it's either pointers or it is the actual content itself all bundled up. I think it's the latter. They're packaging a Maven repository that they already put in a zip file. That thing is the thing that's going to get passed over as an OCR artifact. They have to provide attestation for it, the SBOM, whatnot, and then we check it and verify it. So it feels like for this kind of challenge of like a thing that's like maybe producing child artifacts, really no matter what kind of thing that isn't just true native container image, we have to represent it somehow as an image index or OCI artifact. And then it is incumbent to not only define what is in that thing, but then at the release time, how that gets unpacked and the things within it get vetted.
Right. And like you can certainly, if all you need to do is check the provenance of this tarball, then maybe all you need to do is check the provenance of the tarball, and then you unpack it and you make sure that all your required additional things are present so that you can actually continue with the release pipeline. But I mean, it's a theoretical possibility that you could check the provenance of the tarball, or not check the provenance of the tarball at all, and then unpack everything and then check the provenance of all those things are packaged together. But that just comes to how you want to establish that parity.
Hey, Andrew, I just said in sidebar, ask for a time check for the last question. I've got polls prepared that I can launch for the the participants to see if people are interested in changing the meeting time. Can we make time for that today, or should we defer to next week?
We don't
This is
have a
mainly-
lot. We don't have a lot of folks on the call necessarily. Are those polls you can send out to the email list?
I could reformat them and do that. Yeah.
I think that would be good to do.
Okay.
Because it could be that a lot of folks want this to be 2 hours earlier and aren't here today. So that we're not going to get their thoughts.
That is a perfectly right observation. Thank you.
Right.
I just want to say it might be worth checking with Nizzy if we can move the sprint readiness check, because that would conflict if we move the meeting 2 hours earlier. But if we can move that, things might open up a little more.
Yeah, we might end up with like an hour and a half earlier or something to try to like balance between those. But I'll definitely include Nizzy in the forum, and we'll get all inputs that we can.
Thanks for preparing this, Ralph. Are there any other thoughts, feedback on Adam's topic? I put a couple points down in the meeting notes to try and capture some things. But if there are other things if there are other points which you think would be important to record, certainly add them on there. I know that they're recorded in posterity here, but I don't know how many people are going to go back and actually look at the recording. It feels like a good discussion though. Louis?
Yeah, no, that was definitely a good discussion. I'm just turning the question back to Adam. Like, did you get what you needed from this conversation, or did we just give you a bunch of options and left you in a worse off
I think we do have something to potentially to at least us individually to move forward. I certainly have my own food for thought with the scaling challenge for Maven versus what they're doing on the RPM side. Because it might be that actually for Maven, the thing that's most logical is to have the OCR artifact have all the stuff inside of it. And then it's a matter of delivering it to the system that will then re-represent it in the sort of Maven native way that Java developers are used to.
Yeah, and if you want to chat more about this, Adam, I'm sort of like pursuing this as well in different fronts. So we can probably share notes on that.
Yep.
Any other comments, questions? We have 5 minutes left on the call. Are there any other topics that people wanted to bring up? All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Ralph will be the rotating chairperson on duty.
Sounds good. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks.
Thank you.